שמח לראות את כולם, ויש לנו מושב מאוד מעניין, וסדר הדברים הוא ידוע. אני רוצה להזמין את פרופסור דומיניק בורל מה-CNRS, ושההרצאה שלו תהיה על Buber, a Jewish icon for the world after שואה. חלק מהמושב הזה גם יוקדש לשאלות של אחרי השואה. אני גם מתנצל להודיע שדן אבנון לא יוכל להגיע מסיבות של בריאות. הכל בסדר, אבל אז יש לנו פחות דובר אחד למושב. אז דומיניק, בבקשה. תודה.
Toda Rabba, bonjour. I'm very happy not only to speak about Buber, but also to be in this academy once again. The first time I was here, it was with the Lessing Academy, where I had the privilege of meeting Professor Gershom Scholem. We talked about the first French translation of the Zohar by Jean de Pauli, by so-called Jean de Pauli, because my great-grandfather was the publisher Émile Lafuma. I am also happy to have as Yoshev Rosh Professor Moshe Albertal, who was born in Montevideo, which has enabled me to get even closer to my subject, because one of the many readers of Martin Buber around the world was a rabbi in Montevideo, Dr. Fritz Winter, from Berlin, who was one of the agents of the Buber and Leobeck tradition in Latin America. And I want just to add a little footnotes to Vivian's superb lecture of yesterday. But you know that in France and Germany, we are celebrating last week the 60th anniversary of the agreement between these two people. Bernd Witte was one of the first German intellectuals to come to France after the war. He was assistant and then lecturer in Asnières with Pierre Berthaud and then at Sciences Po. Not only he went to Paris to work as Hellenist, but also to create and help the first administration of cultural and university exchanges. I need not to elaborate to you what an icon is, Guy עשה את זה גם בספר שלו, but I may affirm that Buber, along with Einstein, Kafka, and perhaps Freud, is one of the best-known Jews in the world. The president of Germany, Joachim Gauck, gave a very eloquent talk on the June 23rd, 2015, for the anniversary of Buber's death. It's naturally impossible to list all the translations of Buber's work after World War II, but it's very interesting. It would be also more interesting to investigate not only this list, but the geography of publishers. Incidentally, in this respect, I have just one reproach for Mossad Bialik, which was and is still very important in publishing Buber in Hebrew. We are still waiting the third volume of the letter, the Chilufei Igorot, dealing precisely with the period after the war. This forgotten volume would be a part of demonstration of how Buber was important after the Shoah, not only in Germany, but also in Israel and in the world. The investigation could begin with the John Le Carré situation, because Buber was in Europe immediately after the war, but he didn't want to travel to Germany, but it was forbidden, as you know. For his publisher, the Catholic Lambert Schneider, who published his Bible translation and worked at the Schotten Verlag, it was also impossible to circulate freely, and certainly not in foreign countries, in Switzerland. In Germany, you had to respect different zones, American, British, French, and Russian. We have Schneider's little autobiographical text, Rechenschaft, in which he describes his meeting with Paula and Martin Buber in a little house, one may say a hut or a Budke, on the frontier between Switzerland and Germany in a cold winter, who is just 2 customs officers in order to smuggle a manuscript, because before it was totally impossible to see each other. But there was another obstacle. To what extent were Buber's books still available in those days? Once again, in German. Once again, we have Lambert Schneider's testimony. Kalevala, you know that it was a book that Buber edited. Kalevala was smoked because the members of French occupation needed paper. And the Bible-like paper of this edition was used to roll cigarettes. After the war, Buber was an incarnation of the old German-speaking culture of the world, the Welt von gestern, of the world of yesterday, but also of a decimated community. As a philosopher of dialogue, he had a lot to do with Germans, with Austrians, and with Christians, both Protestants and Catholic. Here, I would like to mention also Margot Kron, who was born in France. He was Buber's last secretary and the head of the Buber archive. She did a tremendous work, not only on Buber's papers, but also on the German archives in the National Library. What the people not know is that at the beginning of her life, he was very active. He was 20 years old, very active in the French resistance. In these archives, we have letters from all over the world to Buber, from Bangalore to Montevideo, from Uppsala to Rome. And I just can mention some cases: French, USA, Ula Italian, and Jerusalem. After the war, Buber was invited to France by the Union des Intellectuels Juifs de France as early as August 45. He gave well-attended lectures done in Paris regularly at the Sorbonne, was awarded honorary doctorate, and then he taught also at the Institut International d'Études Hébraïques, directed by André Zaoui. His exchange with the very well-known Arabist Louis Massignon was not only a religious one, but also a political one, because Massignon, an avid reader of Nair, visited Palestine more than once. Buber corresponded and saw in France very important people: Camus, Mauriac, Poyon, and Lévinas. The first time that I heard the name from Buber was in Lévinas' seminary at the Sorbonne, and then it was at the beginning of the day, 8 or 9, and we had a little seminary on untranslated text from Husserl. And then I asked Lévinas, after when he was a celebrity, I said, why you did that? And he said, I want to be able to count my students. And that's the reason why I just turn around the table. In the last time, he came to Paris once again in year 60 as case speaker at the first meeting in support of the Jews in the Soviet Union, with Jankelevich and with other people. And Buber, it was very important that Buber has to be as key speaker. In post-war Germany, after Switzerland, Trüb, Binswanger, and others, he was rediscovered, and we have to note his work on the first steps on the Wiedergutmachung and a new relationship with German. I have no time to deal about Moshe Schwabe or Max Horkheimer or Michael Landmann. We have all letters of these people. Schwabe was a very interesting person. He was born in Halle. He was a Hellenist and a classicist, and he wanted to import the Wissenschaft here in Jerusalem. He did that, but before he was in Kaunas, head of the Jewish gymnasium where Lévinas was as a student. But it was very difficult for the Buber thinking to find a space between the Frankfurter School, between Martin Heidegger, whom he met in Count Schaumburg's Lippekastel in 1957, we spoke about that yesterday, and the fascination of the so-called analytical philosophy. After he made a very short visit incognito to the Lutheran theologian Professor Dr. Karl-Heinrich Rengsdorf in Münster, the city of Hamburg awarded him his Goethe Prize in 1951. And then it was a catastrophe. It was fortunately, he was in America, and that's the reason why he's just politely say, I am in America, it's very difficult for me to be in Hamburg, but here in Jerusalem, in the Knesset, it was really problematic, and it was a loud protest, and if you read the Divrei Shel Knesset, you don't find the name of Martin Buber, but just a philosophy professor at the Hebrew University became a priest and so on. And after we know that 1953 he came to Frankfurt in order to accept the German Book Trade's famous prize, and he gave also so many lectures in Zurich, München, and Berlin. We have the two. That is a customizing from Buber. You can have it. There's a flasche, a bottle of wine that you got in Heppenheim. It's City of Buber. There. And then on the wall, I will speak about that after. I had also a Zuckerdose with Buber. You know, as you see that alter Buber like Einstein. One first important commemoration was in Worms, and then in Germany we have commemoration regularly. This year is Ishundu, Anivata. 2 years ago it was the translation, the Bible translation. Now we have a Martin Buber Institute in Cologne. We have a Buber Lehrstuhl in Frankfurt, the Buber Studien Publication, the Buber Gesellschaft, and so we have records, film, merchandising like bottles of wine, and the T-shirt also, Happy Life with Martin Buber. That I saw that also, paperbacks and scientific edition. And we have his house in Heppenheim hosts a permanent exhibition. In Germany, we know that there is also always some kind of exaggerated philo-Semitism. It took place of the old anti-Semitism, but we have very interesting Buber-Forschung and very bright inquiries. For example, Kuschel, Scheder, Wehr und so, und von Balthasar, German Jesuit, who wrote a book with some strange title, but very interesting, Einsame Zwiesprache. And it's very interesting because it's one of the first who wanted really to have a dialogue with Buber and not only to praise Heilige Buber, Heilige Buber, and so. And that's the reason why it was very interesting. Just a word of North America, where Leonard Cohen and Allen Ginsberg read Buber, and some emigres like Professor Dr. Henry Kissinger wrote him a letter asking for a paper when he was a student in his review, Confluence and Internationale Forum. However, the person who was Buber's true mediator and introducer was Maurice Friedman. He was born in Oklahoma to a Reformed Jewish family, and then he taught at University of Ohio and San Diego University. His doctorate, 1950, it's very eager, 1950, was on Martin Buber, Mystic, Existentialist, and Social Prophet, a study of redemption of exile. He authored translations and introduction and was the guiding spirit in preparing and accompanying Buber's 3 trips to the United States. And then, at the end, it was a crowning glory, a multilingual volume in the well-known series, The Library of Living Philosophers. You know that we have a huge library of that, you know, with Popper, Einstein, Rieke, Russell, and so on. And then you have a book on Buber. And what is interesting is, you know, you have 30 scholars who are debating for and against Buber, and then Buber had the possibility to give the answer. Es gibt nur somebody is missing, Scholem. Why? Because Scholem didn't want that Buber had the last word. אולי זה גוסיפ של חכביה, אני לא יודע, אבל it's authentic. And then, also, we have file on each lecture. Our colleague from America, you have to do that. Because you have a huge seminary, you have also a lecture in Los Angeles, in GTS, in the New School, at Cornell, North Carolina, Stanford, and so weiter, with the culmination at Carnegie Hall in the presentation with Reinhold Niebuhr and Mordechai Kaplan. And in the archive, we have the file. That means we have the list. I have, for example, a list Then you have, it was in Principles of Biblical Faith, 57. And then you have Salo Baron, Sidney Morgenbesser, I don't know who he was, but the name, Morgan, the same Morgenbesser, the name Morgenbesser is ja fantastisch. Also, and then you have also Friedman, Landes, and so weiter, and Taubes, Kamuvan. In the last biography about Taubes, you saw also his relationship with Buber, and Taubes, I read it because Guy sent me that, Taubes said, I want to be the impresario of Buber in America. The problem is that it was really difficult for also the people because his languages, his German languages, was Scholem always as Bubertät. His German languages was difficult. And I have also a little note with a Lubavitcher, it was a Lubavitcher Rebbe, yes, and then Suados discussed with him and said, what do you think about Buber? And the Rebbe said, also, with the Hasidism, it's not for us interesting. But when somebody wanted to write a book about mystics, the Rebbe saw the book and saw the footnotes of the book and said, okay, I have to delete just one name, not Heschel, but Buber, because he doesn't want to see that the Buber name was there. It was a book that is Rabbi Zalman Schachter, Shalomi, as Reb Salman, who gives this explication. All little vignette, Gershom Scholem wrote to Anna Arendt that an American student said, there has been nothing like Buber after Pepsi Cola hit America. And the first English translation of I and Zoo, Ronald Gregor Smith, a Scottish theologian, that's interesting, was shown published in 1937. And the another English translation was from the well-known philosopher Walter Kaufmann. It was in 1970. And Kaufmann had difficulty, naturally, with thou, and wanted to speak on I and you, and not I and thou, because there is too much theology. בעברית זה קצת, מכיוון שזה אני ואתה, וזה כמובן יותר פשוט. And Kaufmann, we also have a very interesting biography about him and his relationship with. He wrote a book on Nietzsche, Heidegger, and Buber in his trilogy, Discovery of the Mind. Another example would be one in Fordham University, where it was seminary on Martin Buber by Jesuit. I skipped another Europe. It's very interesting because he was in Sweden. In Sweden, he met once again his friend Ehrenpreis. This was people aus Lemberg. You know that Ehrenpreis was a rabbi 50 years in Stockholm, and that Buber was also there. About Dag Hammarskjöld, the secretary of United Nations, also once again a John Le Carré vignette. In order to avoid the journalist, Buber rode to the top floor of the UN in the service elevator, because otherwise he was so few journalist. Hammarskjöld wanted to have Buber as a Nobel Prize, and the problem was it was literature or Peace Prize. And you know that the first translation in Swedish, and today the Swedish translation of I and Thou, of Ani Ve'ata, the first capital is the capital from Hammarskjöld. And it's very moving. If you are going, it's like Rabin and the head of and the thing of the peace or something like that. It's very moving because he was shot in his plane. And in his plane he was translating Martin Buber. Last, at conclusion, that is the reason why we just keep Andy Warhol. We skip we have a fantastic photography that we know with Heuss, with Theodor Heuss in Frankfurt. You know, because Theodor Heuss was a very grand old man and Buber was little. What interesting was the iconology. For his series of 10 portraits of Jews of the 20th century, Andy Warhol wanted a selection of Einstein, Freud, the Marx brothers. You have also Sarah Bernhardt, Louis Brandeis, Gershwin, Kafka, Gertrude Stein. And then he saw the face of Buber. It was totally unknown for him. And he asked, who is he? He was Martin Buber. And I hope that some gatherings like this and in the academy, this question will become an anachronism. Thank you very much.